So I started the quilt. When you're sewing, no matter how careful you be, little scraps of cloth always be left after you cut out a dress or a pillowcase. So while my ears kept listening and my hands kept sewing, I began to squirrel away these bits of cloth. When we was off work, I went to visit people in the quarters. I started asking what fields was where. Then I started piecing the scraps of cloth with the scraps of things I was learning. Aunt Rachel say, "Sweet Clara, what kind of a pattern you making in that quilt? Ain't no pattern I ever seen." "I don't know, Aunt Rachel. I'm just patching it together as I go." She looked at me long, but she just nodded. There was a buzzing in the quarters one summer evening. I saw the patch rollers, and I knew someone had run away. It was young Jack, but 5 days later they caught him. The next Sunday I went to see him, and we walked to the top of the little hill. He didn't smile the way he used to. I took a stick and began to draw in the dirt. I drew a little square for big house, a line of boxes for the cabins of the quarters, and some bigger squares in the fields east of the big house. I drew as much as I'd pieced together. Jack sat beside me, not saying anything, not even looking at first. Then he started seeing what I was doing. I handed the stick to him. I hear him catch his breath up quick. Then he begun to draw. I worked on that quilt for a long time. Sometimes months would go by and I wouldn't get any pieces sewn in it. Sometimes I had to wait to get the right kind of cloth. I had blue calico and flowered blue silk for creeks and rivers, and greens and greens for the fields, and white sheeting for roads. Mrs. liked to wear pink a lot, so big house, the quarters, and finally the big house at North Farm, they was all pink. The quilt got bigger and bigger, and if folks knew what I was doing, no one said. But they came by the sewing room to pass the time of day whenever they could. "By the way, Clara," a driver might tell me, "I heard the master saying yesterday he didn't want to travel to Mr. Moore's place 'cause it's over 20 miles north o' here." Or someone would sit eating cook's food and say, so as I could hear, "Word is they goin' plant corn in the 3 west fields on the Verona plantation this year." When the master went out hunting, Cook's husband was the guide. He'd come back and say, "That swamp next to home plantation is a nasty place. But listen up, Clara, and I'll tell you how I thread my way in and out of there as smooth as your needle in that cloth." Then one night, the quilt was done. I looked at it spread out in the dim light of the cabin. Aunt Rachel studied it. She studied it for the longest time. She touched the stitches lightly, her fingers moving slowly over the last piece I'd added, a hidden boat that would carry us across the Ohio River. Finally, they came to rest on the bright star at the top. She tried to make her voice cheery. "You always did like to make patterns and pictures, Clara. You get yourself married to young Jack one of these days, and you too will have a real nice quilt to sleep under." "Aunt Rachel, I couldn't sleep under this quilt," I answered softly, putting my hand over hers. "Wouldn't be restful somehow. Anyway, I think it should stay here. Maybe others can use it." Aunt Rachel sighed. "But ain't you going to need the quilt where you're going?" I kissed her. "Don't worry, Aunt Rachel. I got the memory of it in my head." It rained hard for the 3 days the next week. Me and Jack left home plantation in a dark thunderstorm. The day after, it was too stormy to work in the fields, so Jack wasn't missed, and Aunt Rachel told them I was sick. We went north following the trail of the Freedom Quilt. All the things people told me about, all the tiny stitches I took. Now I could see real things. There was the old trees struck by lightning, the winding road near the creek, the hunting path through the swamp. It was like being in a dream you already dreamed. Mostly we hid during the day and walked at night. When we got to North Farm, Jack slipped in through the darkness to find what cabin my mama at. Then we went in to get her and found a little sister I didn't know I had. Mama was so surprised. "Sweet Clara, you growed so big." Her eyes just like I remembered, her arms strong round me. "Mama, I'm here for you. We're going north. We know the way." I was afraid they wouldn't come, but then Mama say, "Yes." Young Jack carried my sister Anna, and I held on to Mama's hand. We kept on as fast as we could, skirting farms and towns, making our way through the woods. At last, one clear dark night, we come to the Ohio River. The river was high, but I remembered the place on the quilt where I'd marked the crossing. We searched the brush along the banks until at last we found the little boat. This was hid here by the folks in the Underground Railroad, I said. The boat carried us across the dark, deep water to the other side. Shivering and hungry and scared, we stood looking ahead. "Which way now?" Jack asked me. I pointed. The North Star was shining clear above us. Up there, through the woods, north to Canada. Sometimes I think back to the night we left. When young Jack come to wake me, I can still see Aunt Rachel sitting up in her bed. She just shook her head before I could say a word. "Before you go, just cover me with your quilt, sweet Clara," she say. "I'm too old to walk, but not too old to dream, and maybe I can help others follow the quilt to freedom." Aunt Rachel kept her word. The quilt is there still at Home Plantation. People go look at it, even folks from neighboring farms. I know because some of them come and tell me how they used it to get free. But not all are as lucky as we were, and most never can come. Sometimes I wish I could sew a quilt that would spread over the whole land, and the people could just follow the stitches to freedom, as easy as taking a Sunday walk.